Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking specifically about the Sprawl. The Sprawl is a cyberpunk tabletop role-playing game which runs on the Powered by the Apocalypse rule set, and it is created by Hamish Cameron, and the company that produces it is Anders Ludier. So I was pretty interested in that company that produces specifically the Sprawl, and that name Anders Ludier gives me a clue that this is an international product. And I think international tabletop role-playing games are really interesting. I think I look at international tabletop role-playing games the way Japanese look at American anime. So there is not a lot of American anime, okay? And generally, Japanese anime fans are not rushing out to consume American anime. It's not their favorite, right? But there are times where Americans have created anime that is so strong it actually will flow back, and it will grow even a robust audience in Japan. One of the very first to do this is Ruby. So Ruby is made by Rooster Teeth. It is sourced in America. It is, and it is American anime, right? And it really has a really distinct difference and feel than Japanese anime. And but it's so strong that anime fans in Japan are actually watching it. And so I think that I guess that's how I partake in international tabletop role-playing games. They don't really get into my collection too often, but more and more I am seeing that the international scene is really starting to make more and more really fascinating tabletop role-playing games. And and the biggest one is Modiphius. Just watch out for Modiphius. They're really bringing out some incredibly good games. Some of the games do have problems, though, because things that in America you would never put in a game, you will find in some Modiphius games. So you have to tread carefully because they are international games. And so sometimes things lose something in the translation. So it's just one of those things. All right, so let me talk in depth about the Sprawl. So first I'm going to explain which version of the game I am actually reviewing. This is my review for the game. And so the version that I am reviewing is version 1.0 of the Sprawl, which came out in 2015. So this game is 3 years old, coming up with 3 years old now. And I'm specifically reviewing Midnight, the Sprawl Midnight. Now, what does Midnight mean? Well, the version that I'm reviewing the PDF, right? Okay, and the PDF is available in this. So you have the regular PDF, and you have Midnight. Okay, I think they might have I think Daylight actually might be the name of the other one, but I really think it's really interesting. Midnight is a strong digital PDF created to be read on your laptop. And so cyberpunk is the theme of the Sprawl, and when you're reading the book, it has those old 80s green text letters that you would find on like an Apple Macintosh, and different color, and all the text looks like it would on a computer, and it has a black background, which really pops and looks fantastic when you're reading it on a tabletop, on a tablet, or on a laptop, or on your phone. By the way, I read the vast majority of my tabletop role-playing games on my phone. It's much better to read them on a laptop or on a bigger screen, but I always have my phone on me, and so I'll just catch as catch can and read a little bit more. And so that's the killer feature of a mobile, is it's with you all the time, right? And so I can really just throughout the day I can read for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. When I get home, I will switch over to my laptop, and read there, right? But this Midnight, it really is exciting to me. So this is specifically an entire skin for this tabletop role-playing game that looks great on a computer, but would be very, very costly to print. And so there's a print version. Now, the thing I thought was exciting about that is I think Midnight is a colorway on this book. I've been really getting into sneakerhead culture recently, and sneakerheads really, they love high-end sneakers, collectible sneakers as a form of expression. And one of the things that is really important in to sneakerheads is colorways. So they'll get a shoe, and then they'll get that same shoe in a different color. And as I've been researching the sneakerhead culture, I realized this is important. Like, you can have something, but that same thing in a different colorway can make it really different, really unique, right? Gandalf the Gray. Well, here's the new colorway, Gandalf the White. It's very different, right? So, and this, I just thought it was really cool that this game had a colorway, right? And I would love to see games do this more. It's time intensive, you know what I mean? But Hamish Cameron took the time and invested that into this tabletop role-playing game. It's really unique, right? All right, so let's talk about the game overall and what it is and what it does, okay? So basically, the Sprawl is really, in my opinion, it's Cyberpunk 2020 for today, right? So it is a modern Cyberpunk tabletop role-playing game, right? And now, I'm a huge fan of Cyberpunk 2020. Let's talk about Cyberpunk 2020. Cyberpunk 2020 came out like somewhere in the 90s, I think, either the early 90s or the late 90s. And that game is a really special game. It took William Gibson's cyberpunk themes and settings and placed them firmly into the tabletop role-playing game world, and made it possible for people to play cyberpunk tabletop role-playing game sessions and campaigns to tell their own cyberpunk stories. Now, one thing, I'm not sure a lot of people know this, but the other thing that's really special about Cyberpunk 2020 is Cyberpunk 2020 was written by Mike Pondsmith, right? Now, there's a lot of talk today about diversity in tabletop role-playing game design and in the tabletop role-playing game community. Well, Mike Pondsmith is an African-American tabletop role-playing game designer, and they're somewhat rare. There aren't a ton of them, right? They're not the majority of tabletop role-playing game designers. And Mike Pondsmith is one of my favorite tabletop role-playing game designers, simply because he is amazingly talented, right? Now, a while back, he left tabletop role-playing games and went over into the video game end, right? And that is, by the way, if everybody doesn't know, that is an absolute arc for many tabletop role-playing game designers, because you can go from low-money tabletop role-playing game design to high-money video game design, right? And so there is an arc, a career arc within tabletop role-playing game design if you want to make money. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, Mike Pondsmith, I think it was really good that he had an opportunity to make more for him, more for his family, more for the people he cared about. I do miss him very much in our tabletop role-playing game hobby, but I don't begrudge that choice in any way. Right. But Cyberpunk is really special for the history of tabletop role-playing games, for the history of Cyberpunk, for the history of diversity. And this is Cyberpunk 2020 for the modern day. And I see an incredible amount of value in that. And the reason why is I absolutely love Cyberpunk. I love the genre. And I think it's really great that Cyberpunk is carried forward into the modern day. And Cyberpunk is really, really interesting now. And one of the reasons why is when Cyberpunk came out, William Gibson invented Cyberpunk. He's a brilliant American author, and he brought forward Cyberpunk and made it something really special and unique, right? But the thing is, what is Cyberpunk? Well, it's chrome in your body, which is like, cybernetic enhancements. It's mirror shades and trench coats. It's rain in Seattle. It's it's an aesthetic. It's a prediction of the future. So it's a prediction of the future that comes from the 80s, right? That was projecting what would happen in the year 2020, right? And what's really interesting now is Cyberpunk was clearly wrong. It did not do a really good job of predicting what the future was going to look like. Our future doesn't look like what Cyberpunk predicted in the 80s it would look like now. And that's what makes it special, because Cyberpunk is essentially, we've caught up to the future it was predicting, and now Cyberpunk becomes an alternate present, right? It's really, really strange. Cyberpunk is very unusual. The other thing is Cyberpunk is classic American literature, Neuromancer and Burning Chrome. These books are just amazing. Johnny Mnemonic, right? These are books, really, really strong books, and William Gibson just did a tremendous job with them, and they were really important to me when I was coming up, reading them and seeing what the future was going to look like, right? And it was really unusual. Like, it was, Rastafarians in space. You saw stuff in Cyberpunk that just didn't exist anywhere else, right? Well, one of the things that's really cool about the Sprawl is the Sprawl honors every bit of that. It honors the Cyberpunk 2020 tabletop role-playing game. It honors William Gibson's Cyberpunk. It just does a great job of making a space within modern tabletop role-playing game rules design, within modern games availability, right? Because, honestly, the Cyberpunk 2020 tabletop role-playing game is fantastic. I love it, but it's 30 years old, right? So, it definitely doesn't have the strongest rule set. It's problematic to play. So the fact that there's now another, modern rule set where you can use to sit down and play some tabletop role-playing games in Cyberpunk from an author who understands Cyberpunk and respects Cyberpunk, that's a big deal to me, right? And I think Hamish Cameron, after reading this tabletop role-playing game, it's very clear that he understands Cyberpunk, and he really has a deep love for and respect. And that's interesting, because I think a lot of times you could be a creator that loves something, but maybe doesn't respect it. That's interesting. Love and respect are two very different things. Kind of interesting. One of the things I just want to talk real quick about, what are the actual character classes in there? Driver, Fixer, Hacker, Infiltrator, Killer, Pusher, Tech. There's a whole bunch of different character class types that you are able to play in the game, and each one of these has its own specific playbook, right? And so Reporter is also in there, and I also wanted to talk about Pusher real quick. Pusher was really interesting. I think it's a poorly chosen name, because pusher in America often is synonymous with pushing of a particular type of product that's illegal and highly damaging. But in this game, it is a really interesting aspect, because pusher is a pusher of an ideology, right? So so anarchy or neoconservatism or pro-cybernetics, whatever your ideology, a pusher is somebody who spreads the word, a disciple, someone who's out there really proselytizing for their specific, what's important to them. Excuse me. And so that's one of the things, that's in there. This really is an incredibly unique game. It really is pure cyberpunk. Let's talk about the overall game itself. It's really well written. One of the things that's interesting is it's a very fun read, because there's fiction just salted. It's like you put a meal down in front of you and then you put the salt on. It's just salted throughout with fiction. Almost all of the examples of things that are in the playbooks on what you can do, you know what I mean, have a little a vignette, a tiny little story that just kind of illuminates the setting for you, right? And in addition to that, and those are all put into, so the text of the game is in white text against a black background. These fiction examples of story elements, of TRPG elements within the game, are in orange, and they're like tiny little vignettes. And then there are actually short stories inserted into the game, and those are in green green font, and that's really interesting. The design on this is really, really interesting. Now, it does bring up an interesting concept. So this is a very old thing that has been happening in tabletop role-playing games for a long time, And I'm not sure we need it anymore. One, I do want to say I really like the layout and the layout and the writing in the Sprawl is absolutely top notch, okay? But when I looked at all this fiction, I was thinking to myself, it's long, right? And so one of the things that is a really big important thing to me in tabletop role-playing games is I am convinced, for the health of the hobby and for the hobby to go viral and to really spread quickly, these games need to get shorter. I really think the ideal tabletop role-playing game, I don't really think any tabletop role-playing game should be over 99 pages long anymore. I really don't. No tabletop role-playing game that is created now and going forward should be 3 digits in page length. I'm convinced of this, right? For a whole bunch of reasons. I'm not going to insert them into this review. But it really did make me wonder if it's a good idea to put fiction into tabletop role-playing games. And the reason why is those fiction stories are wonderful, right? When you are reading them in the book for the first time, right? And they really pull you into that world, right? Both players and game masters, and really kind of just immerse you in that tabletop role-playing game world. But we are in the golden age of tabletop role-playing game design, and there's just hundreds of fantastic, fascinating games out there. And so one of the things I'm thinking about is I think a lot of people are continuing to put fiction into tabletop role-playing games, but just because it's tradition, and not thinking, what does that really mean for modern tabletop role-playing game designers? Well, one, I really think that these games need to be shorter, and if you take all this fiction out, those games are going to be shorter, right? And that would really help. And the other reason why is when you read that fiction on that first time, it's immersive and it's wonderful. Every other time you go back to that book, it's a pain in the butt, right? You have to page through all this fiction slog to get to what you need to play that game. That is a problem. That is a problem. So you have this content that's in many of these tabletop role-playing games, and you know what? Let's talk about it. Dungeons and Dragons does not do this. It never has, right? You don't get short stories in the middle of a core tabletop role-playing game rulebook, right? It's just a bad idea. Pathfinder doesn't do it either, right? Now, one of the things that Pathfinder did that I thought was just, it was top-notch, was Pathfinder did this the best. They had, each chapter would open with a 2-page spread of beautiful, gorgeous art done by Wayne Reynolds. And then you would have just one paragraph of a tiny little story. That's a cool way to do it, right? But this game, the Sprawl, has I'm not kidding, 5,000 word short stories in the middle of it that were super fun to read when I was reading the tabletop role-playing game, and are going to be worse than useless, every other time you go to the game. So, so I really think we should really consider not putting fiction. And the other thing is that fiction can go up on the website. It can be doled out as extras to people in the community, after the game has been released, and really just is there to inspire play, right? But I really don't think that fiction should be inserted into tabletop role-playing games anymore. Now, that really is not. I just want to be clear. I don't think that is really a problem of the Sprawl. It's not a problem of the Sprawl at all. It's a problem of the tabletop role-playing game design community. We have to decide, hey, we've been doing this forever. Do we continue to do this now, right? And that is a design. That's a community design question, and it's only being prompted because it is here in the Sprawl. But the Sprawl is really unique. It's a wonderful tabletop role-playing game that really honors cyberpunk and does a great job of carrying cyberpunk forward into the now, allowing people to play exciting games of cyberpunk. By the way, no true discussion of tabletop role-playing game of cyberpunk and tabletop role-playing game should not include Shadowrun. Shadowrun is a beautiful, wonderful game. Where does the Sprawl rank? By the way, my rating of the Sprawl is it is a 5 out of 5 star game. the only things I didn't like, but they weren't enough to make it lose an entire star, and I'm rounding up, it is an indie game and it has indie art. Yeah, I'll leave that there. Also, everybody knows I'm not a super fan of PBTA. I really wish this was in a different version. But when you look at this game, it's very clear that Hamish Cameron has worked very hard on this game. Also, I was really fortunate, and I think this, so I think I was in the presence of Hamish Cameron. It's one of the reasons why I read this week. Was I went to PAX Unplugged 2017. And there was this gentleman running all day games of the Sprawl, right? And I went up to organize my game with one of the organizers, and one of the game masters came out, and she said, "How did the Sprawl game go? That was your third for the day." And the person said, "Oh, well, it went real well, and I'm gonna, I'm ready for my fourth. So just bring them on. Where's my next set of players?" And she goes, "Well, they'll be here in 10 minutes, Hamish." And I'm like, whoa, wait, what? So I'm pretty sure Hamish Cameron was at PAX Unplugged 2017 in Philadelphia, in my backyard, running the Sprawl. And I didn't get a chance to play with him because I was running my own games, and there's about a million things to do at PAX Unplugged. And I only put that together. I was like, did I see Hamish Cameron? So it's possible there was some other dude named Hamish running the Sprawl all day long at PAX Unplugged 2017, but I think it was Hamish Cameron. So that is my review of the Sprawl. It's not cheap. I think it's like $15 on DriveThruRPG. I don't know if I would suggest it for. I think this is definitely a get for any designers, just to see what he's done. It's a get for any Cyberpunk fans. For regular tabletop role-playing game fans, it does run on PBTA, which can be a real challenge. I really love this game. I really do think it's a 5 out of 5 star game. But overall, if you're a Cyberpunk fan, this is definitely a must-get. It really is beautiful, and I think it's wonderful that there's a great current game that is allowing players to play cool, exciting Cyberpunk games with modern rule sets. Take care.